Welcome to today's edition of The World Today on global food security in an era of COVID, climate change, and conflict, which will examine the confluence of events threatening food security around the world, including the war in Ukraine, extreme weather, and pandemic-related supply chain disruptions, among others. Our discussion today will feature Barron Segar, President and CEO of World Food Program USA, in conversation with Penn professor Jennifer Pinto-Martin. Barron Segar is the president and CEO of World Food Program USA, the nonprofit charged with inspiring and mobilizing people in the United States to support the mission of the UN World Food Program to feed the world's hungriest people. He has more than 20 years of experience growing philanthropic and cause marketing platforms for organizations spanning global humanitarian aid, public broadcasting, and finance. He has led visits to field operations in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and the Polish border with Ukraine to shine a light on the life-saving work of the UN World Food Program. Jennifer Pinto-Martin is the Viola McInnes Independence Professor in the Behavioral Health Sciences at Penn School of Nursing, with a secondary appointment in the Department of Epidemiology in the Perelman School of Medicine. She currently serves as the ombudsperson for the university and is the executive director of Penn's Center for Public Health Initiatives. She has served as director of the Master of Public Health Program, department chair, and chair of the University Faculty Senate. She has been part of Penn's stupendous, wonderful, inimitable, fabulous COVID response team since the start of the pandemic and continues to be involved in all public health decisions related to COVID. So you may thank her for your safety. She is also a faculty fellow at Perry Woldhouse. That's her highest achievement, of course. I'm delighted to welcome both of them to the stage.
Hi, everybody. I have to say, when I heard your introduction, I got a little nervous. It said a behavioral scientist is interviewing me, and I don't know, maybe I can learn a few things.
Not to worry, I'll go easy on you. So I think you're going to start with some opening remarks.
So let me just say thank you for having me today to hear a little bit more about the work of the World Food Program. I'm the president of the World Food Program USA. Our role is, as was mentioned earlier, is to really galvanize, mobilize people in the United States around the work of those who are hungry. And there are unfortunately a lot of really hungry people today, 152 million people that the World Food Program is trying to reach right now. It's unfortunately, it's a very alarming time. We're seeing numbers of people close to starvation that we've just not seen before. And so I think it's going to be a great discussion today. And then everything that we do in the United States is to support the mission of the global organization, the World Food Program. And if you haven't heard of the World Food Program, we are the largest humanitarian organization in the entire world. 22,000 employees, 80% of those staff are on the ground, working in over 120 countries, risking their life every single day to make sure that no woman, man, child dies of starvation.
Wonderful, thank you for just that brief introduction. I'm going to start with a question. There's a lot going on in the world today that's affecting global food security. As we all know, we have the war in Ukraine, we have climate-related impacts on food production, we have pandemic-driven supply chain issues. What do you think are the main challenges and drivers that are threatening global food security?
So we study this quite a bit at the World Food Program, and there really are four drivers. They're kind of the four C's that are causing extreme food alarming challenges today. One is COVID. It's now with us over 2 years. And one of the things that we saw was borders starting to be closed, imports being limited, and with a lot of countries, their informal work. So they're going to marketplaces to sell goods and products, restaurant industry, tourism industries, and those were the areas that were the hardest hit. So we're still seeing a lot of people around the world recover, particularly in those industries from COVID. And think about the number of lives lost during COVID. A lot of lives lost who were the breadwinners, if you will, of the families. We have to talk about climate. Climate is one of the biggest challenges we face. And I say this today as there's a huge storm heading for Florida. I mean, the world is heating up, and we have to acknowledge that and know that. And we're working in countries like a Somalia or a South Sudan, where there's extreme heating. The cattle are dying, the livestock. There's no way that they can live. We're seeing crops that are absolutely being burnt. And there's not enough water to go around to keep these crops alive. So we're seeing extreme conditions. And then, by the way, when it rains in such a significant way that there's extreme flooding. And we are seeing, hurricanes, those types of tropical storms that are just wiping out crops, acres and acres and miles of crops. So climate's clearly a main driver. Our costs are going up. Your costs are going up. But one of the things that I'm reminded of, and one of the things that I think about every single day, that in the United States, on average, 10% of our income goes toward food. So 10% of our income goes toward our cost of feeding. Anybody want to take a guess? I'm putting you on the spot. Of in a country where the World Food Program works, what percentage would you think of that income goes to food? Anybody want to guess? Yes, front row. More than half. 80%. So you're both very close. More than 50% of income in countries where the World Food Program works, of your income goes to buying food. So I would also just say, if you're making $2, $13 a day, imagine your costs going up by 24% over the past year, but you're spending 50% of your income on food. And if you're a mother or a father, you have to literally decide which child eats and which child does not eat. And the last thing I would say is, of everything, is probably the biggest driver of hunger, and that's conflict. When we think about Ethiopia in the Tigray region, we think about so many areas around the world think about Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There are wars everywhere, and wars are preventing us from reaching the most vulnerable. And in many cases, food is used as a weapon of war.
Okay, that was a very sobering response. I appreciate that. Tell us what the World Food Program is doing. What are your priorities in combating all of those challenges you just laid out?
So the reach of the World Food Program is extraordinary. And I would also just say that I'm very grateful for the contributions we get from governments around the world, in particular the U.S. government, private sector, and I would just give a shout out to my staff at the World Food Program USA that are listening in to this broadcast today. But our priorities are, first and foremost, it's saving lives. Again, reaching 152 million people with meals and with services just in the past year alone. The numbers are pretty sobering. I was reminded when I came in, just because of COVID and travel, I have not been to Philadelphia since 2019. Well, I'm here to tell you that that between 2019 and today, we've seen a doubling of people around the world who are suffering from hunger. They don't have food to eat, their stomachs are empty, and they're seeing the consequences of a lack of food. Double since 2019. Right now, 60 million children are malnourished, suffering acute malnutrition. And what to me really keeps me up at night is 50 million people are really on the verge of famine. They're marching towards starvation. Now, I would also say I'm going to balance this with some good news. And the good news I would say is, I was watching Bloomberg this morning. The price of oil is going down from 130 to 70 to $80 a barrel. The cost of containers is going down because there was this huge, massive buildup of people around the world that ordered stuff. And our cost of doing business went up. And I am hopeful that because of oil going down, some of the supply chain backlog is starting to solve itself, that we'll see some relief of some kind. However, what we are seeing is the price of food is not going down like we had hoped. So our priorities are twofold. It's reaching those that are in the greatest need, that are relying on organizations like the World Food Program to live, to eat. And then there's a sustainability piece to what we do. I was recently in Central America. I met with a number of female smallholder farmers, and they're trying to get trained, to get the resources needed to grow, to become to become sustainable, so that they don't have to rely on assistance. So we're seeing a lot of success, by the way, in several countries with smallholder farmers that are getting the resources, the funding that they need to not rely on humanitarian assistance.
So that sparks me to ask you more about the climate resiliency programming that you're doing as part of the World Food Program. I've heard a little bit about that, and it's fascinating, and I think the audience would appreciate hearing more.
We're spending a lot of time on climate, and I think it's interesting because it's taken a while for our leaders around the world to really acknowledge that climate's an issue. And everywhere I travel in the world, I'm getting ready to go to Lebanon in November. Climate is an issue. And it is impacting hunger the most. We're seeing it around the world in almost every single country where the World Food Program works, whether we're talking about South Sudan or Somalia. And what we're seeing in those two countries, as an example, are extreme heat. No livestock can grow crops, followed by flooding. And the flooding comes over a weekend. We're talking about tremendous rains. And it's really hard to grow crops with this level of unpredictable climate. And so, what are we doing? And I would say this with climate. Let's think about Pakistan. 2 weeks ago, Pakistan hit by rains, a third of an entire country underwater. I still can't really grapple with that. A third of an entire country that's underwater. These are human beings like you and I. Over 1 million people in Pakistan today that are just living on the ground. They have no shelter, and we're trying to feed as many as we can, feeding millions of people in Pakistan, but our resources are somewhat limited. I would say that a few things we do with climate is we do a lot of, again, I go back to my travels over the last year in El Salvador, meeting with smallholder farmers. So who would have known, but when you think about growing corn, there are 3 different types of corn that you can grow, and certain types of corn are more resilient than others. So we do a lot of putting irrigation systems in, rebuilding roads because roads are washed away, training communities how to grow more resiliency, picking products to grow that are gonna that will survive with extreme heat, and also we teach a lot of farmers how to retain water, and it's not that complicated. It's called a half moon. And so all you do is you look at where the earth, where the land is maybe skewing a little bit down, and you will take the soil and you'll build something that captures the water and allows the crops to grow. In a lot of countries, we do weather forecasting. And so we're teaching local communities around when to grow, what to expect, and how to do inventory control. We're really big into pre-positioning supplies. There are certain countries around the world that we know are prone to natural disasters, hurricanes and flooding. So the best thing that we can do there is make sure that we are pre-positioning supplies, so that when a likely hurricane or flooding occurs, that we're already there, we're close by.
Mhm.
And so it's a pre-positioning, it's training smallholder farmers, it's working with policymakers to make sure that climate is on the radar, that they know that if as a country, as a globe, if we don't address climate and have policies that address climate, that the impact is going to be people are going to starve to death. And that is a real consequence of climate.
So I know that you have a map that you'd like to show to the audience. Maybe we can pull that up now, and I'll ask you to talk a little bit about the role of Ukraine and Russia in wheat production. We know that they produce a lot of the world's wheat and fertilizer, and so what impact will the war have on global food security? And this interactive map may help describe it.
So several years ago, the World Food Program recognized the need to use data in making decisions. And we created what's called a hunger map. And this is a look around the globe. By the way, I would also say that all of you have access to the hunger map. All you have to do is type in the World Food Program, a live hunger map, and this will come up. And there are live feeds that go into this map every single day. And so, where do we get our data? Well, we get it from cell phone use, because in many countries, cell phone data is still accessible. We have, I mentioned earlier with the World Food Program, 80% of staff, so say 19 to 20,000 people on the ground, partner organizations on the ground, local communities, surveys, governments that are feeding it into this map. And it is not only used by the World Food Program, but it's used by governments. It's used by other NGOs, other non-government organizations, other UN organizations that are looking at this. And so you'll see that not only do we have data which shows where extreme hunger is located, and by the way, right now, this past week, we came up with 19 hunger, we didn't come up with them, but our data showed 19 hunger hotspots around the world. This is where we're sounding the alarm bells, by the way, areas around the world where without help, without additional resources, men, women, and children are going to die. They're marching toward famine, and the world needs to turn their attention to these areas around the world, and it is red, and red is the worst. Red is basically saying we are one step away from famine. And again, we talked about the why. The why is extreme heat, costs going up. Many of these countries that we talk about are landlocked. You got to ship supplies in. And by the way, I should also say there's enough food in the world to feed everybody. The challenge that we have is supply chain. Costs are going up. We talked about Ukraine earlier. We have ships now that are leaving Ukraine with thousands of metric tons of wheat, but it is really in an alarming way impacted like a domino effect on the world, and it's having an effect on faraway places like Yemen and Somalia and South Sudan. So again, this hunger map tells us where our resources and the world's resources are needed the most. And we, by the way, do collaborate with all the other UN organizations. It's never one organization doing it alone, but this map is used in saying, okay, we have now got to mobilize our resources to do more with less and make sure that people in these red zones are being fed, and they must be reached.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me ask you if you think multilateralism is the most effective response to global hunger. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the World Food Program USA supports the UN World Food Program and in this larger mission to combat global hunger.
So we combat hunger in a variety of different ways, and some of these ways may surprise you, because I would say when I first started, they surprised me in a really positive way. So a lot of us think about the World Food Program with the planes flying above, airdrops, but it is a very solid way of distributing food. We have worked with local communities, faith-based communities. that are on the ground that are helping us distribute our food. So it's rarely is it just the big airdrops that fall out of the plane, but it is a system that is set up. It's a supply chain system to make sure that our food gets to the right people. Whether it is an in-kind, which is a bag of food, and we're talking about a 120-pound bag of food that will provide enough food for a family of four for an entire month, whether it is school feeding. So last year, the World Food Program, we fed 15 million school children. And by the way, also with enough meals to take food home to their families. And one thing I would tell you, having witnessed and seen the school feeding programs, is that by having food in the school, the communities come together. And the girls go to school and the boys go to school. And one of the things that we have seen is that when there's no food in a household, kids don't go to school. So it has been a major reason why young people are in school. But one of the things that I'm most proud of with the World Food Program, and I would even say in parts of Ukraine, we're the biggest provider of cash-based transfers. So two ways that we do it. And I'll use an example with a young mom. Her name is Esteli. So Esteli is a 30-year-old mom, two kids, and Esteli was brought to the attention of the World Food Program through her local community. And the local community said to the World Food Program, Esteli's husband migrated to the US. She doesn't have a job and she doesn't have food. So I met Esteli when I went to Central America recently, and I went to the bank with Esteli and I saw how she got a voucher for $120. We went to the bank. Most people do have ID cards. And in this case, Esteli got the equivalent of $120. And she turned to me and she said, I just went through a training with the World Food Program and they taught me what to buy and what not to buy. Would you like to go to the store with me? Listen, I love going to the grocery store, but I'm generally stay away from healthy food. But Esteli was trained, and so we went into the store, and the first thing that we saw was a vegetable stand. And she bought a big bag of tomatoes for about $1, and then she bought different leafy types of products. She couldn't afford beef. She couldn't afford chicken. We bought rice. We bought beans. And Esteli said, she said, listen, my son's 10 years old and he likes things that are a little chocolatey. So I am going to kind of break the rule a little bit and go here and get him some like Cocoa Puffs. And it wasn't Cocoa Puffs, but it was kind of the equivalent. And so, but almost everything she bought was very, very healthy. I would say that one of the most humbling things that happened to me when I was in the store with Esteli was I was wearing my World Food Program vest. And there was a 72-year-old lady who saw me and she came up to me and she said, excuse me, I just want to tap you on the shoulder to say that I am also a beneficiary of the World Food Program. And she said, I want to show you what's in my basket. It was rice and beans and vegetables. And I just had this tingling down my spine, knowing that we were really impacting the most vulnerable of the vulnerable and that they were really eating the most healthy of foods. But I would say that we have a responsibility of feeding children, the parents, and in this case, a 72-year-old female who'd lost her husband and didn't have resources. And again, so, it's cash-based transfers, and it's actually that in-kind delivering of assistance on the ground. And I can't leave out what I saw, which is how we're working with college students in many cases and local communities to train smallholder farmers. The majority are female smallholder farmers to do inventory control, when to grow crops, what to grow, what not to grow, and how to store them and how to take them to market. And I've got some really cool stories, if time permits, around some of these small business entrepreneurs that we met and how we were working with them at the World Food Program to take their products to the local market. It's some really cool stories.
That's wonderful. That's a very positive and encouraging message. So you have a lot of students right here, and I'm going to ask you to talk about what's your call to action for them? What can they do? How can they participate? I know that you have a very well-known musician, The Weeknd, who's been very active in your organization. So maybe you can entice them with a little bit of information about him and then
Do you
talk.
notice everybody got up there, all started paying attention when you said The Weeknd? Don't worry, I do the same thing because I love his music, and I went to a show in Washington, D.C. So I would say that, we need your voice. There are a lot of people around the world that are made vulnerable by their circumstances. And I want to make sure that we are amplifying their voices. And I need your help in amplifying those voices through your social media. Talk about something that you learned today. When you're having a conversation with your families or your friends over the next week, just mention, the World Food Program, and go to the Hunger Map, by the way. It's really cool to check out, play with it, look at some of the stories that are online. And so I would say, form a club here, do something, and think about it throughout your entire life as you go through your career. Never forget this moment, this day. I need you. I need your voice. I need you to think about it as you think about your careers, as you look at innovations around the world. We have an innovation accelerator based in Berlin. It is charged with coming up with innovative ways to solve some of the world's problems. Two things that they've come out with. One is hydroponics. We're growing a lot of crops here without soil. Oh, by the way, I love the sun coming in. So I just say I'm getting my vitamin D up on the stage today.
Yes.
And so, it's coming up with innovative technologies to solve some of the problems. We're a very data-driven type of organization. And, you mentioned The Weeknd. About 2 years ago, so at the World Food Program USA, one of my board members is very close with Abel Tesfaye. And she called me and said, Abel wants to make a gift to the World Food Program. His parents are from Ethiopia, he has a very special connection. And so I went to Los Angeles, had dinner with Abel, and soon after we made him a global ambassador. And so, over the last year, when you buy one of his tickets to any of his shows around the world, we get $1 of every ticket. He's coming up with product to benefit us. When you go to his website, it promotes the World Food Program. And I'm going to be with him in Los Angeles in a few weeks, where we're going to have a very special announcement tied to the World Food Program. But he lends his voice, and not everybody has 170 million followers, or comes out with a song and gets 1 billion views on YouTube. But we all have a following, we all have a voice, and I would say, let's not forget about those who are made vulnerable by their circumstances, and let's amplify those voices. And that's really where I need you. And that's why I'm here today. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think there was something, whether you're kind of coming into us virtually or you're here with us today, we have voices, and we want to amplify those voices for those that are made vulnerable by food insecurity.
I'm hearing a future internship program for Penn students in his response. So let's think about that. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. And we also have a very large online audience that are sending questions in. So if any of you have questions, please stand up at the mic and on the side there, and we will call on you. I'll start with an online question. One of the things that this individual is concerned about is the problem of overnutrition. And is that something, we know there's world hunger and there's obesity, and is that something that the World Food Program addresses, and if so, how?
So obesity is an issue that we're facing in a lot of countries right now, Africa, Central America. One of the initiatives with the World Food Program that I'm incredibly proud of is how we train students for school feeding, how we train parents to cook. So we'll use school feeding as an example. I gave this statistic, the World Food Program providing 15 million school meals for young people. But part of that is that we're on the farms, and we're in extremely rural areas, by the way. And so we're buying produce through the local farmers. It's potatoes, it's rice, it's beans, it's vegetables. And I happen to drop in my travels to a lot of the school feeding programs to look at what people are eating. And I would tell you one thing, it is very, very healthy. And, there are no fast food places in many of the countries many of the areas where we work. When you think about the World Food Program, don't necessarily think about the city center. Think about us working with the smallholder farmers where we are really far outside and the hardest to reach in the very rural of areas. And the amount of training that we do for young people. And I would say that when we do the vouchers or we give out food through our supplies, they're generally they're fortified. They are super cereals, Plumpy Nut, which is a fortified nutritional bar. So everything that we do has an eye toward nutrition. I would also add that when you think about the role that we play, to go back to Esteli, we're trying also to make sure that Esteli has a career. So we're also trying to see how we can map her and match her because she wants to work. Nobody wants to rely on humanitarian assistance. So we're trying to look at agriculture and how we can provide jobs in local communities, but we always have an eye toward nutrition.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a line at the microphone, so please.
Yes, great. Thank you for the question.
Hi, thank you for being here and for the work that you do. So I have a question that's, at the broad scale of the international humanitarian effort. So I guess, speak to it from your own experience as part of that. We know with climate change, there's going to be the escalation of climate migrants, and that, the current model isn't going to be enough simply, at the scale that we need. There's going to need to be some kind of, revolutionary new means of integrating people into new places when they're forced to move. So what do you think are the high leverage points in the institutions you work with to make that integration into new places smoother and better for everyone?
So when you think about the World Food Program, one of the biggest roles that we play is advocacy. And UN organizations have a very unique role. So we're invited in by governments to work. And we generally we're not working in countries where we're not invited. And so what does that mean? Well, that means we have a seat at the table. And so whether it's in the United States or, I talked about Pakistan earlier. I mean, Pakistan contributes very little in emissions, but look at the impact that it's having. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that everybody knows that, the impact that climate and the heating of America or these floods, it is displacing so many people. We have more people on the run today than at any other time since World War II. That is a fact. And so one of the things, it's a twofold approach. One is making sure that we're calling on our political leaders here in the United States and around the world to come together and solve climate, because they have the power with their resources to look at climate emissions, to look at what they do to address. And in the meantime, for the World Food Program, we're looking at what can we do to, and sometimes relocate people to areas that are less prone to climate risk, pre-position supplies for people that want to stay. And also, we're having to change a lot of what we do with smallholder farmers. So 5 years ago, smallholder farmers could plant almost any type of crop, and they can't do that anymore. So we've now gone to weather forecasting. We're now educating people about when to grow crops, when to not grow crops. We're using different tiers of systems. So when it rains, how can the farms not be washed away? So it's largely how we're changing the economic landscape so that farmers are not going to be decimated when their crops go away, so that they're not washed away and the livestock are not dying and they're not burning away. So again, twofold: working with policymakers, making sure that climate is on everybody's agenda. We're also at the table with a lot of climate initiatives within governments around the world, and working within the UN system, Because my job is to make sure, and the work of the World Food Program is to make sure that we're telling about the impact, that if we don't address climate change, humanity is going to suffer.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you again for the work that you do as well. And I found the hunger map particularly interesting. And I want to ask you, to what extent do software or other capabilities currently exist to track, model, and build redundancy in food, water, energy, and fertilizer supply chains in the US government or in the United Nations? And would that sort of software or data inform policy or intervention decisions or scenario analysis? And are there serious gaps that exist at the moment?
So we use satellite technology to help us track where our resources were needed as well. We work with NASA, we work with a lot of global organizations to make sure that we know where people are on the move. I would say we collaborate with all of our partners. So again, we're never doing it alone. So when you think about the UNHCR and UNICEF and local governments and faith-based groups, by the way, playing a significant role with our outreach. So we're all working together. And one of the beauties of what the World Food Program does is we're all sitting at the table together, and and then every country has a plan. So I would say that if I was in El Salvador, or if I was in Lesotho, or if I was in Vietnam, or if I was in Ethiopia, every country has a different plan. And that what we're charged to do is to then implement and find funding to implement those specific programs. We also work with a company called Palantir, which they do a lot of data collection. They help us really track hunger. Hunger is on the move all the time. And it's on the move because, you know, whether it's a typhoon or whether it's some type of a war that's breaking out, people are running, they're on the move. And so it allows us to use this technology, the data collection, to reallocate our resources and also to work with other UN organizations so that they're moving their resources as well. I'll give you an example because I was there. I went to Ethiopia a few years ago, went to Gambela, which is one of the 9 regions in Ethiopia. And we looked at how Save the Children and the World Food Program were all working together using data collection. We also, by the way, use data collection to reunite families with their children who have been separated. But I'll speak to the World Food Program USA real briefly. I've been the CEO of the World Food Program USA since January of 2020, and I have a vision. And my vision is to work with the private sector. So tomorrow I go to Minneapolis. I'm going to meet with Cargill and General Mills. We're talking to Microsoft. We're talking to Google. And there is a significant role that the private sector can play using their technology to help us solve problems that we can't solve on our own. So I'll address part of your question by saying that what my vision is as the CEO of the World Food Program USA, and is to work with the private sector. There are problems that we can't solve on our own, and we can only solve with the private sector. So one of the things that my team is doing very well, working with the global organization, working with the private sector, is coming up with 2 or 3 things where we need help, and we need the private sector in the US to help us solve. A lot of that is technology and data collection because the world is changing, but in the US, companies are innovators. And so what we're doing is we're shifting some of our resources at the World Food Program USA and at the World Food Program to work with companies, because it's not just financial. It's not just, give us your financial resources, but it's how can we use your technology, your assets. We're doing this with UPS already. UPS comes in, they look at the supply chain that we have, and they're making recommendations on how we can do it better. So we're already working with the private sector, but I think we're going to be doing more of that over the next few years.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here.
Well, what have you thought so far? Have you enjoyed it?
I have enjoyed it.
Good.
It's been very insightful. Thanks.
It's been insightful for me too.
You talked a lot about pre-positioning supplies to combat the consequences of climate disasters and also working with policymakers to bring it to the radar of a lot of the communities. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face while working with these policymakers and some strategies that you use to resolve these challenges?
So I'll start with the good news. And the good news is that most people around the world see food as a nonpartisan issue. So regardless of what side you sit on, people around the world, I believe for the most part, see that no human being should die of starvation. And I think that that is a widely held belief. And so, from our standpoint, food is working with policymakers. By the way, making sure that policymakers in country. So in country, I would say with Ethiopia, we since we have a seat at the table, we're making sure that food is a priority. That as countries are doing their budgets, they're doing their priorities, we're making sure that food is a priority. That malnourished children are a priority. That adults are a priority. That food gets to those who are at most at risk, and that funding is also going to rebuild the roads and the infrastructure. That is huge, by the way, the roads and the infrastructure, because if we are creating opportunities for smallholder farmers to grow crops, they got to get them to the market, and that is largely done through infrastructure and through roads. And I would say on the pre-positioning supplies, it's a good news, bad news story, because I have seen where supplies have been going for pre-positioning to one area of the world, but then they've been rerouted to another because the need is so great. And that is, it almost makes me cry because it is so sad that our strategies are being shifted so significantly because so many people are suffering around the world. So we're still doing pre-positioning supplies in those areas that are, again, prone to humanitarian disasters like earthquakes and floods. But I would say that without a doubt, we weren't expecting a Ukraine. We weren't expecting the fallout from the Ukraine. And we also have to recognize that Ukraine has had a domino effect on so many other countries, prices going up, supply chains being disrupted, and the impact that this war has had on humanity has been devastating. But working with policymakers here in the U.S. to make sure that they know the impacts of not feeding people who are hungry. Let's not forget that hunger is a stabilizing, when people are fed, it stabilizes the world. When you look at countries where there is no food, people are rioting, they're in the streets, people are migrating because they don't have food. And I'll use the example of one of my travels. I had my World Food Program Best in, and I was talking to some of these farmers, and I saw this group of people that are your age, and they were looking at what we were doing. They're like, "What are you people doing over here?" And I walked up to them, and I just said, "Hey, I'm with the World Food Program, and I'm curious, have a lot of your friends migrated to the U.S.? Are they migrating? Are they leaving? And have you, why are you here? We're thrilled that you're here, but why are you here?" And all three, boys and girls, 17, 18 to 22. And what they said is, a lot of our friends have migrated, but we have decided to stay here. And we've stayed here because we've seen how the World Food Program and USAID and others have come in, and they've taught us how to build resiliency. And so we have built co-ops. We've got 30, 40, 50 acres of food. And this one girl said, we have food. And because we have food, we have income. And we're taking a lot of our products, and by the way, we're talking about tilapia farms, we're talking about corn, beets and squash, things that they take to farms, and they're able to provide a level of resiliency. So I would say that, for us, policymakers get it. And the U.S. government, again, has, and by the way, every single person that pays taxes, has contributed to the World Food Program. So, we're very grateful to all the taxpayers. And then we've also seen rallying in the US from the private sector, companies, foundations, individuals, young people who see food as the first line of defense. So policymakers play a huge role in our work and making sure that that there's an awareness that without funding, our work will not be funded. And as the gentleman asked earlier, we've got to put climate on the table. They've got to address climate change and emissions, and they've got to curtail the emissions. The most vulnerable countries in the world are suffering because of countries that are sucking up the air and that are making pollution around the world, and the most vulnerable are suffering, and particularly women and children.
Thank you.
I'm going to, before you ask your question, just ask you to talk a little bit about the efficiency metric that you mentioned to us earlier, because I think that's one of the reasons you have policymakers and private donors willing to join forces with you, because it's pretty remarkable.
So at the World Food Program USA, so we're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit organization. And largely because of my team and the efficiencies, I mean, we have an extraordinary group. We're not a huge group in the US. We're based out of Washington, but we have staff in about 10 different states. And we were notified by Charity Navigator that we're going to be ranked in the top 1 or 2 percentile around efficiency. So what does that mean? So our fiscal year closes on Friday. Wow, closes on Friday. And we will have raised around $170 million from the private sector this year. And why that's important is 2.5 years, 3 years ago, we were raising $19 million a year. But what I am most proud of is not only how the private sector has responded to the World Food Program through the World Food Program USA, but we're doing it in an incredibly efficient way. So at least 92 cents of every dollar this year goes to program. So what does that mean? That means that 92 cents of every contribution that has come in through the World Food Program USA has gone out to support programs, and particularly gone to the World Food Program to provide funding for programs. And so I would say that we also recently had a great success where our donors, our supporters, overwhelmingly, when asked, reached out to their policymakers. So we have 120,000 individuals that support us. 7,300 people over the last year have sent an email or letter or they've called their local congressmen and women and said, we care about food, we care about what's happening around the world, and we want you to care too. So it's really been, food is, what we found is that food is, there's an emotional connection that people have in the United States with food. And so I'm very proud of that. And I would say, again, I happen to be blessed to work with a team at the World Food Program USA that have really worked incredibly hard and they're very strategic and fun to work with as well.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. This has been great. I just had a question. You started mentioning the private sector a little bit more, and earlier today you mentioned working with innovation and that being a priority, and specifically with hydroponics. I'm curious what you envision for partnerships with the private sector and how you can best leverage the private sector, and more specifically as well, like how you can leverage all the innovators and the smaller startups and entrepreneurs of the world.
So I'll give you, it's a great question, and I will give you an example of something that I've done in my career. I haven't done it yet, but I'll use something that was more of a model. So in my last career, I had a team and we worked with Microsoft. And we worked with the global headquarters, an organization somewhat similar to the World Food Program. And the challenge that we faced was so many young people on the run. And you think about young people going from South Sudan, at that point we're going to Ethiopia. Now we have people from Ethiopia going to South Sudan. So because of war and conflict, the schools are bombed and the kids are traumatized. So how do you collect their school records? So here you have a database. You go from point A to point B, your records go with you. So we work with Microsoft to develop a system in the cloud called the Learning Passport. And basically through the programmatic teams on the ground, we put the school records in the cloud so that we could track that young person that went from here to there to there. And so for me, I see us working with technology, looking at how we can solve a problem of maybe tracking where the most vulnerable people are going. I would say the hunger map has been a lot of work with the private sector, looking at how we can use satellite technology to better track people that are on the move. People are going all the time. They're moving, and all of a sudden you've got 500 people, 1,000 people, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people that are on the border of Jordan, for example. And through this tracking, we're able to know where they are so that we can do our best to deliver services. Cargill may be another good example. Again, I'm going to Minneapolis tomorrow. I would say I'm very thankful that Pilar Cruz, who is the head of their corporate social responsibility and sustainability, she's joined the board of the World Food Program USA. And so we're looking at something that Cargill can do, working with the World Food Program to co-create. So again, when I use the word co-create, what's a problem that the World Food Program is having that is impacting those that are hungry, and how can we get them to help us solve this problem through their skills, their assets. And by the way, they're already doing a lot of work with us with smallholder farmers and training smallholder farmers on how to do inventory controls, take products to the market. And so I just see us as doing much more of that. And that really excites me, by the way. So I'm excited about the work that we're doing around sustainability. I use UPS as an example. And by the way, I would also say this: companies have to come to us in a very altruistic way. So when a company comes in and they're looking at all the work that we do, I don't want a company to then turn around and bid on it. Oh, well, look, we've identified something that, where we could help, but, I want to make sure that, that they're coming in and they're helping us. And by the way, we're seeing this across the board in a very altruistic way. I would also say this: their shareholders are demanding it. Young people are demanding it. You are demanding it because before you will buy their products, you are requiring them to show that they are good corporate citizens. Keep doing that, by the way.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn to the online questions for a minute, just because we have a huge online audience and I want them to feel like they're part of the crowd here. So this is a question about the World Food Program's support for meaningful inclusion of women and girls as beneficiaries of change. Given how central gender is to alleviating and preventing hunger, you've talked about this, supporting female farmers, the majority of farmers are female farmers, putting cash transfer into the hands of women, as you discussed, and women-headed households, providing sufficient support so that girls have access to food in their home when there's boys and other males in the home, and may be served first. Is this an area that you've targeted in the World Food Program, and if so, how?
So we have a specific audience, and our beneficiaries, more than 50% of our beneficiaries are female. And it's really important to say that. I would also say well over 50% are smallholder farmers. Every single time I have gone to the field, I met with a farmer, and by the way, this is also supported by local communities. So I should also say this, that women carry significant roles, whether it's working with the World Food Program, whether it's serving in government and policy. There are policymakers, and so everything we do has a lens toward female staff. Even when you look at the World Food Program staff, more than 50% of our staff, I don't know the exact number, but are females working in significant roles. I would also say the leadership of the World Food Program, very balanced, diversity, and inclusion is very important to us, as it is, by the way, at the World Food Program USA. We were talking earlier about my leadership team at the World Food Program USA, which represents a very diverse group of leaders, different skill sets, different areas around the world. And I'm very proud of what we represent, but everything we do has a lens toward women and children. and making sure that those that are the beneficiaries of us are that there's a level of parity to everything that we do. Our distribution points are largely through women. So, sometimes I see a picture of a plane going overhead and the food dropping out, and I see these guys going up and they're fighting for the food, but that is not in typical fashion of how we distribute food. It is largely done through women in the local communities who are then making sure that those who are the most in need get the food. And I would say that without a doubt that in every single country where we work, women and children are made vulnerable by the circumstances of food. And so they, just by the sheer fact of the inequities in the most vulnerable countries, are the largest beneficiaries that are served by the World Food Program. And the country offices ensure, and by the way, they have very deliverable measurement goals around who our beneficiaries are, because we track the beneficiaries reporting back to the World Food Program.
That's great, thank you. Okay, I think we can squeeze in maybe 2 more questions if your answers are really short.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Hello, thank you very much. So my question is looking at, as you talked about previously, there have been an increasing amount of crises, climate-related, conflict-related, pandemic-related, that put a strain on your ability, on the budget that you have, right? Because budgets are not limitless, to feed people who are the most vulnerable. So looking back at the amount of crises we faced in the past 2 years from 2020 onward, what are the lessons that have been learned to face these different crises and to pivot and to try and feed as many people as possible? And is there a plan that, worst case scenario, things continue to get worse in all of these areas and in other areas we can't yet see? How will the World Food Program and World Food Program USA try to utilize its budget in the best way so it's reaching as many people as possible, knowing that even still not everyone can be reached?
So I would say one way is through collaboration. One of the things that I consistently see when I travel to the field is the level of partnership. And I'm going to use, maybe I go back to Ukraine. I went to the border of Ukraine and Poland 3 weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine. And the level of collaboration with UNHCR and World Central Kitchen and the World Food Program and Save the Children and CARE was extraordinary. I would also say that everybody had a very specific role. What you will not see in a less developed country is people stepping over each other. It is extremely coordinated. And what you also saw, by the way, in Poland was where the business community was rallying around those who were fleeing Ukraine to come to Poland. And because most organizations didn't work in Ukraine, by the way, very new to us, they were a country that could care for themselves. And so we found how everybody came to the table. We did work plans, by the way, largely led by the governments of Ukraine, governments of Poland, helping direct where the greatest needs were. So again, high level of collaboration. I would say that I see a lot of progress being made with the smallholder farmer, because through the trainings, through different types of crops being grown, we are making progress. There are more communities that are able to be self-sufficient today, and I'm very proud of that. I would also say this, very important. Let's not forget that up until 2015, we saw 9 years of declining hunger. It's solvable, but I would say that we happen to be in a place in time where things look pretty bad. I mentioned earlier, the price of oil is going down. The price of container ships is going down. We are going to see prices fall. I do believe that. And that will provide, and then supply chains will start opening up a little bit. And so we will see some, our ability to deliver and reach will go up. But I am gravely concerned about these 19 hunger hotspots where there is a lack of access to food. I use Yemen as an example. We talked about this earlier. before we came on stage that, we're having to lessen the number of distributions in Yemen. So going from, say, 2 meals a day down to 1, because we have to feed now more people in Ethiopia and other countries because of the domino effects from Ukraine. But I am a very hopeful person, and I am very hopeful that the supply chain will sort itself out, that that we will be able to reduce our costs. But I would say that the world is paying very close attention to hunger. And I believe that the world is not going to stand by while women and children die of famine and starvation.
Okay, that is a very powerful statement to close on. I'm sorry, you'll have to find him after the talk because we're out of time. That was really wonderful. We thank you so much for your time, and I know LaShawn's going to come up and close.
Hi, and I have a little bit of a reputation of being in the wrong place while I make these closing remarks. So as usual, we want to give our guests a round of applause to thank them.